The artists and the poets, it seems, have always understood love more deeply than the scientists and more honestly than the theologians. In his poem, Give All to Love, the 19th century Unitarian writer Ralph Waldo Emerson praised romantic love, saying, "'Tis a brave master, let it have scope. Follow it utterly, hope beyond hope. High and more high, it dives into noon with wing unspent, untold intent. But it is a god, knows its own path and the outlets of the sky." Emerson was certainly right in claiming that love is itself a divine energy that continually outruns and transcends the emotions that we invest in particular relationships, even as it infuses those passions with an intensity that seems deathless. Love has an inherent mystery, an untold intent, as it wings its unpredictable way into and out of our lives. Romantic love cannot be commanded either to come or to go or to stay. It knows its own paths and the outlet of the sky. Such love arrives when it arrives, on its own schedule, in its own way. The poet W.H. Auden, suffering from the loss of a romantic relationship that he had hoped would last, demanded to know of this elusive God. When it comes, will it come without warning, just as I'm picking my nose? Will it knock on my door in the morning or tread in the bus on my toes? Will it come like a change in the weather? Will its greeting be courteous or rough? Will it alter my life altogether? Oh, tell me the truth about love. Tell me the truth about love. That's all we want to know, isn't it? What is the truth about love? It's tough to pin down, in part because it seems to be such a fleeting phenomenon, that elusive winged thing called love. One of my mentors in ministry used to say, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, that he no longer did premarital counseling because, he explained, people in love are moving toward each other at the speed of light. And the laws of physics tell us that no information from the outside world can penetrate into such a system. He insisted, however, that any couple that he agreed to marry must come back a year later, and then they will sit down and talk after the emotional atmosphere has settled down. "How's it going?" he would then ask. "Any surprises? What's different from what you expected?" It's an interesting approach, which with much to recommend it. I haven't quite given up on the idea of premarital counseling, though, and virtually all of the couples I've met with have expressed appreciation for the opportunity to talk about their relationship as they approach their wedding day. Perhaps the laws of physics don't quite apply here. Perhaps, as the philosopher Blaise Pascal noted, the heart has its reasons that reason does not know. And yet the scientists, too, have something to say about love. Usually when I meet with a couple for premarital counseling, I offer them the option of using a psychological survey instrument called the Prepare Enrich Inventory, which was developed over 30 years ago by Dr. David Olson and his colleagues at the University of Minnesota. One of the helpful features of this inventory is that it is continually being updated and refined, so that over the years it has generated a huge database, including information on more than 1 million couples, information that can be accessed and analyzed in longitudinal studies. That is, many couples have been followed over the years to see how their relationships have thrived or failed to thrive. patterns can be discerned in the data and correlated to relationship histories so that when similar patterns show up in a premarital inventory, these couples can approach their relationship with a greater awareness of both the potential challenges and, more importantly, the strengths and resources that they bring to the marriage. Over the years, I've used this tool with scores of couples, straight and gay, cisgender and transgender, young and old, rich and poor, from different ethnic and cultural and religious backgrounds, first marriages and remarriages. It works for everybody because it's designed to get at those deep perennial issues that are bound to arise in any committed long-term relationship. What I like most about it is it's not based on any particular psychological theory about what marriage should be, but rather on the empirical data from actual relationships. It tells the truth about married love. There are 10 categories in this inventory that have proven to be significant measures of marital health and vitality. And the areas are marriage expectations, personality issues, communication, conflict resolution, financial management, leisure activities, sexual expectations, children and parenting, role relationships, and spiritual beliefs. In addition, there are some statements on the inventory that are designed to measure something called idealistic distortion. That is the degree to which one or both of the partners are seeing their relationship through rose-colored glasses, so to speak. I always stress to couples that it's not a test, because people tend to be nervous about that, and that the responses are not judged right or wrong, but simply provide the data and the basis for a conversation in which we talk about those issues which have been shown to be important in all long-term love relationships. In the old days, couples would fill these out on paper with their number 2 pencils, and we'd mail them in and wait for the return. Now it's all done instantly online. To each of the 165 statements in the inventory, couples are asked to respond individually on a 5-point scale, with 1 representing complete disagreement with the statement and 5 indicating a total agreement with the statement. So, for example, in the category of marriage expectations, there are statements such as the following: I do not expect that we will ever have serious problems in our marriage. 1 to 5. My partner is the only one with whom I could have a happy marriage. 1 to 5. After marriage, some of my needs for companionship will be met by people other than my partner. Here's one I especially like. After marriage, it will be easier to change things about my partner that I don't like. And I expect the romantic love in our marriage to fade somewhat. Among the items designed to measure idealistic distortion are such statements as, my partner completely understands and sympathizes with my every mood. Every new thing I have learned about my partner has pleased me. And so on. Taken together, the responses to these statements and others like them yield a profile that can be matched against the profile of other couples in the database. And this profile, their profile, provides the basis for a meaningful guided conversation. And I hope you see how these questions, if engaged with seriously, can lead to in-depth conversations in which the truth about love can be explored thoughtfully, compassionately, and honestly. The profile becomes a platform or framework for conversation, and it is that conversation that counts. Not just the conversation with me, but much more importantly, the ongoing conversation between the couple. If the couple disagrees in their responses, we can talk about that discrepancy Disagreement is not necessarily a problem, nor is agreement always good. Depending on what the particular item is, agreement may be flagged for special focus. For example, take that statement, I expect the romantic love in our relationship to fade somewhat. Let's say both partners score that as a 1, meaning I completely disagree. The romance in our relationship will never fade, they say, holding hands and smiling at one another, moving a bit closer. What could be wrong with that? Nothing's wrong with it, nothing at all. Romance is a wonderful and powerful and beautiful thing, and I'm all for it. In fact, I believe that the experience of romantic love can open our hearts to transcendence in ways that are genuinely holy, indeed sacred. Romance is not to be cynically despised or fearfully avoided. It's just that the data shows that couples with that 1-1 response to that particular item tend to run into some fairly predictable disappointments down the road. So that's why it's flagged for special attention and why we talk about it. Maybe years later, the memory of that conversation will come back at a time when it's needed most, and people realize that a change in their feelings does not mean that the love is not there. Often in this conversation, we come around to an agreement that the word change might be better than fade. Most people do recognize that romantic feelings will indeed change over the years, perhaps even in surprising and interesting ways. The point that I want to lift up for reflection this morning is that the discrepancies are precisely where the potential love energy is or appears. Not only are there interesting differences in how individuals of a couple experience their relationship, but there's always a gap between the real and the ideal for each individual. Rather than seeing that as a problem, wise counselors understand it as an opening and an opportunity for exploration and growth. The psychotherapist Polly Young-Eisendrath describes this dynamic well in her wonderfully titled book on marriage counseling called You're Not What I Expected. Maybe more than I expected. Certainly other than. As couples learn to sort through and withdraw the projections that they've placed upon each person by their partner, they're able to reconstruct their relationship on a more realistic and respectful basis. That word respect, by the way, in its Latin origin means literally to look again, respect, as a spectacle, spectate, to look again. And when we have the courage to look again at our partners and ourselves, we may be amazed at what we see. Love becomes real when we truly realize the otherness of our beloved. They are not merely the screen on which we can cast our lovely and terrible projections. I'm reminded of the philosopher Iris Murdoch's observation that love is the difficult realization that something other than oneself is real. Mark Epstein, a psychiatrist and practicing Buddhist, also explores the inherent gap between desire and fulfillment in his book, Open to Desire, Embracing a Lust for Life, subtitled Insights from Buddhism and Psychotherapy. Contrary to popular belief, says Epstein, the Buddhist tradition does not teach the elimination of desire as such, but rather freedom from clinging attachment. Desire arises as an inherent part of the human condition. To the extent that our desires can be held mindfully and lightly in our awareness, rather than being suppressed or denied on the one hand or seized upon with fierce attachment on the other, they can be a powerful guide to enlightenment. Far from being an obstacle, the energy of this erotic desire can be a window onto the transcendent realm, imagined differently in each religious tradition, but always radiant with cosmic meaning. Mystics of all religious traditions have used metaphors drawn from the experience of erotic love to describe their relationship to the divine. Now, all God talk is inadequate to the task, of course, but the language of romantic love in its full, fierce heat is about as close as one can come to describing the mystical encounter with the divine. So, for example, the Jewish rabbis have used the frankly erotic imagery of the Song of Songs to describe the love of God for the people of Israel. And the Old Testament prophets speak in anguish tones of a lover scorned and betrayed by an unfaithful partner. Christian Catholic mystics, such as Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross, speak in unabashedly erotic terms of their longing for ecstatic union with God. Evangelical Protestant Christians sing of their relationship to Jesus in terms that are reminiscent of young lovers. In the garden, he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own. The 13th century Sufi mystic Jalaluddin Rumi wrote that the moment I heard my first love story, I started looking for you, that is to say, Allah. Examples could be multiplied from many traditions, but the point is that it's only when we selfishly cling to the object of desire that suffering arises. Emerson, who was, of course, strongly influenced by Eastern thought, advises the young lover he is addressing in his poem to remain free as an Arab of his beloved. Now, Emerson must have had the image of a Bedouin shepherd in mind, one who is not fixed or attached to any one place, but is able to move at ease and feel at home in anywhere in the vast desert landscape. Now, we might phrase it differently today, of course, in a time of greater cross-cultural sensitivity, but the point remains the same. Even as we cling with life to the maid, or man, in Emerson's words, we are to be mindful of the changing and impermanent nature of desire. Emerson says of the beloved, though thou loved her as thyself, as a self of purer clay, though her parting dims the day, stealing grace from all alive, heartily know, when the half-gods go, the gods arrive. This is not to devalue desire, but simply to see it in its actual nature. The real religious problem is not that we desire too much, but that we desire too little, that we do not trust love enough, that we do not truly let it have scope in our lives. Opening to desire in this way can be a religious experience. The goal is not freedom from desire, but the experience of desiring freely. I've often been struck by the similarities between the experience of falling in love and the experience of religious conversion. When my friend John fell in love, he wanted to talk with me about it. He didn't just want to talk, he had to talk. There was a kind of overflowing energy that simply could not be contained or controlled, but which had to find expression in whatever stammering and ecstatic language he could summon up. John tried to use mere words to describe the transcendent beauty of this particular woman. The way she looked at him, the way she seemed to understand him, the way, even before he could complete a sentence, she knew what he was going to say. I've never met anyone like her, he told me breathlessly. She likes the same music, the same movies, the same books. Her politics are mine, her taste in food, everything. He'd had lunch with her in a little restaurant that she knew about, and he just sat there the whole time watching her eat, for God's sake, while his own soup grew cold in the bowl on the table. The truth is, he wasn't hungry for mere food. He was being nourished simply by being in her radiant presence. When I look in her eyes, Bruce, I know she's the one. And as he said this, John looked into my eyes, searching almost desperately, seeking some kind of recognition and confirmation. Did I understand? How could I understand? Mary was a new member of a church that I served, but her words, or ones like them, are ones that I've heard many times, as have most of my colleagues in UU ministry. Where has this church been all my life? It's like coming home. It's not like other churches. I don't hear all that theological stuff, and the people are so friendly and smart and like-minded. They share my values. I love the bumper stickers in the parking lot. And the sermons, it's like they're addressed directly to, written for me. Mary jumped into congregational life with both feet, joined 6 committees in her first year, and was an enthusiastic participant in every Sunday service. She told all her friends, at least the ones who would listen, about the wonderful new church she had joined, and a few of them even accompanied her to services. Now, both John and Mary were in love. They were in that intense early stage of love that is sometimes called infatuation. But if I had said to John, the psychologists have analyzed and understand this state of mind as a neurochemical process, I would have missed the point entirely and probably lost a friend in the process. Similarly, if I had asked Mary to kindly curb her enthusiasm, I would have preempted a wonderful journey of self-discovery, rudely interrupting an intimate personal adventure that includes a gradual maturing of perception and perspective. Eventually, they both broke through to a new and higher stages, John moving, not without struggle, from infatuation to genuine intimacy and love, and Mary passing from what the psychiatrist M. Scott Peck calls the pseudo-community of niceness to an experience of authentic community. According to Peck, that requires a journey beyond the ethic of niceness through an experience of chaos and emptiness and disappointment. Maturing in love involves a journey beyond enchantment, or perhaps I should say through enchantment, to a radical honesty and moving into another level of experience, an experience of commitment and freedom. It's precisely when we recognize that things are not what we expected that real, mature love can begin. And that's when love gets interesting. Mature love arrives as we move from the romantic idealization through disillusionment and discernment to genuine partnership. When the half-gods go, the gods do arrive. Growing in love is a difficult process, and people often avoid it, either settling into a diminished relationship or bailing out and going off in search of what another psychotherapist, James Hollis, describes as the magical other, the mythically imagined one person out there who is right for us, who will repair the ravages of our personal history, one who will be there for us, who will read our minds, know what we want, and meet those deepest needs, a good parent who will protect us from suffering, and if we are lucky, spare us the perilous journey of individuation, of becoming a self. In this individuation, on the other hand, requires hard work and reflection, and disillusionment is an important and painful part of the process of growing in love. Now, don't get me wrong. In speaking of disillusionment, I'm not saying that those qualities that John saw in his beloved, or that Mary saw in her church, or that the mystics see in their visions of the divine were not really there, that they were simply conjured up out of thin air. Love is not an illusion. The illusion that must be broken is that love is a fixed and static state of being that can be possessed rather than a dynamic and changing energy that can only be shared. I would never want to disabuse anyone of their feelings and experience of romantic love. Such love is a powerful force, which is capable of carrying us beyond ourselves, of leading to self-transcendence and genuine spiritual transformation. When we truly reflect upon the experience of falling in love, growing in love, being in love, we gain a sense of freedom, insight, and expanded compassion. One of my favorite movies is the 2004 romantic comedy Love Actually. Now, my older son, Matthew, who's an actor, emphatically disagrees. There's a discrepancy there between us. But I love my son, of course, but I insist this is a great movie. And Roger Ebert, the distinguished late movie critic, gave it 3.5 stars out of 4, describing it as a belly flop into the sea of romantic comedy. The movie's only flaw, he says, is also a virtue. It is jammed with characters, stories, warmth, and laughs, until at times, Curtis, that's Richard Curtis, the director, seems to be working from a checklist of obligatory movie love situations and doesn't want to leave anything out. Kind of like one of my sermons. He says, it feels like a little like a gourmet meal that turns into a hot dog eating contest. Well, but how can you go wrong with a cast that includes Alan Rickman, Emma Thompson, Keira Knightley, Colin Firth, Hugh Grant, Laura Linney, Liam Neeson, Rowan Atkinson, Billy Bob Thornton, Denise Richards, and Bill Nye, who I believe is up for an Academy Award this year. The writer and director Richard Curtis, who is British, says that his inspiration for the project came to him when he was heading home to London, but stuck at the LAX airport, where, as he watched the joyful reunions and tearful partings taking place all around him, he was struck by the realization that all these ordinary people had stories, love stories. So the opening scene in the movie is a montage of people over which we hear the voice of the narrator. Whenever I get gloomy with the state of the world, I think about the arrivals gate at Heathrow Airport. General opinions starting to make out that we live in a world of hatred and greed. But I don't see that. It seems to me that love is everywhere. Often it's not particularly dignified or newsworthy, but it's always there. Fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, husbands and wives, boyfriends, girlfriends, old friends. When the planes hit the Twin Towers, as far as I know, none of the phone calls from the people on board were messages of hate or revenge. They were all messages of love, if you look for it. I've got a sneaky feeling that you'll find that love actually is all around. And the Trogs, by the way, are part of the soundtrack of that movie. Now that may be sappy and sentimental, perhaps. Certainly my son thinks so. But I prefer to think of it as a simple yet penetrating observation. Love is all around us. It's a universal current in which we live and move and have our being. Love is not something that we have to conjure up from within, produce from our own resources. It surrounds us and includes us and invites us to participate. I often conclude a wedding service with these words of benediction. May all that you are always be in love, and may all that is love always be in you. And just as often, when I officiate at a memorial service, I include a little poem titled, accurately and appropriately, Late Fragment by Raymond Carver, the same one whose story I referred to in the introduction. He was a poet as well as a novelist and short story writer. He died in 1988 of lung cancer at the age of 50. And these words of his are engraved on his tombstone, and with them I will close. And did you get what you wanted from this life, even so. I did. And what did you want? To call myself beloved. To feel myself beloved on the earth. Amen.